I'm Ellen, and I'm gay.
In the spring of 1997, the world of American television held its breath. Millions of viewers tuned into a sitcom episode that would change pop culture forever. On screen, Ellen Morgan, the character played by Ellen DeGeneres, looked at her therapist and said the words that echoed far beyond fiction: "I'm gay." It was the first time a primetime lead on American television had openly declared her sexuality. For some, it was a triumph of honesty and courage. For others, it was an outrage. Overnight, Ellen DeGeneres became not only a comedian and actress, but also a cultural lightning rod. Yet what looked like a victory was, in truth, the beginning of a storm. Advertisers pulled out. Conservative groups protested. The network grew uneasy. Within a year, the sitcom was canceled. Headlines that once celebrated Ellen as America's funniest sweetheart now questioned if her career was over. Behind the smile that had won her fame, Ellen was collapsing. She fell into a period of silence, depression, and professional exile. For a woman whose entire craft was built on laughter, she now faced a life where no one seemed to be laughing with her anymore. This story is not just about a comedian who came out on television. It is about the price of truth. It is about a woman who risked everything, her career, her reputation, her livelihood, just to live authentically. And it is about what happened after the lights dimmed, after the applause ended, when Hollywood turned its back on her. To understand Ellen DeGeneres, we must begin here, at the paradox of her life, that the moment she revealed her truth was also the moment she lost everything. For decades, Hollywood had built itself on images, polished, controlled, carefully crafted illusions. Ellen was supposed to be safe, funny, charming, the kind of comedian families could watch together without discomfort. But when she spoke her truth, the illusion shattered. She was no longer just Ellen, the comedian. She became Ellen, the gay woman. And in 1997, that was still too much for much of America to accept. What happened? What happens when laughter collides with fear, when the courage to live openly meets the cruelty of a world unprepared? Ellen's journey forces us to confront those questions. But her story is not one of defeat, because years later, Ellen would return. Stronger, louder, and with more power than before. She would build one of the most successful talk shows in television history, reshape the conversation around LGBT representation, and become a beacon of visibility for millions. Still, the scars remain: the years of silence, the whispers of scandal, the weight of being too honest too soon. To understand the Ellen who danced on stage every afternoon, we must also understand the Ellen who sat alone in the dark, wondering if she had destroyed her own career beyond repair. This is the story of Ellen DeGeneres, the rise, the fall, and the rebirth of a woman who changed television forever. And as we follow her journey, we must ask, what is the true cost of living in a world that rewards illusion? Ellen Lee DeGeneres was born on January 26, 1958, in Metairie, Louisiana, a quiet suburb just outside New Orleans. Her childhood was not one of glitz or glamour, but of modest living, the kind that leaves deep imprints of both comfort and longing. Her father, Elliot, was an insurance agent, practical and grounded. Her mother, Betty, was warm, witty, and creative, the spark of humor in the household. The family was deeply tied to the rhythms of Southern life, steeped in Catholic tradition. Sundays meant church. Rules were firm. Appearances mattered. For a young girl who would later live her life on stages, Ellen learned early about the tension between what is shown to the world and what is hidden behind closed doors. When she was just a teenager, her world shifted. Her parents divorced, leaving Ellen and her brother Vance caught between two homes. The separation fractured her sense of security. Suddenly, the laughter she had relied on as a shield became not just a tool, but a survival mechanism. Humor was her way of making sense of pain, of masking the fear that she was, in some unspoken way, different. It was during these early years that Ellen began to sense the quiet truth within herself. She could not name it yet. In the conservative Louisiana of the 1970s, there were no role models, no television characters, no public figures to point the way. But Ellen felt it, an undercurrent of difference that isolated her. She laughed to bridge the gap, to make people love her, to hide what she did not dare reveal. Her relationship with her mother, Betty, would prove pivotal. Betty was open-minded, supportive, and quick-witted. a woman who encouraged Ellen's humor even when life grew heavy. Later, when Ellen came out to her mother as an adult, Betty's support would be unwavering. But in Ellen's teenage years, the silence was deafening. Ellen feared that her truth could fracture her family even more than the divorce already had. At the age of 15, Ellen faced another blow. Her mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. Watching Betty fight for her life left a deep impression. Ellen was still a child, but she saw up close the fragility of existence, the way everything could shift in an instant. In the face of illness and fear, Ellen again turned to humor. She cracked jokes at her mother's hospital bedside, not out of cruelty, but as a desperate offering of light in a room heavy with shadows. Betty would later say that Ellen's humor kept her alive during those dark days. This was the foundation of Ellen's comedy: laughter as resilience, humor as a form of healing. It was never just about punchlines. It was about survival. But as Ellen moved through adolescence, the tension between her inner truth and the world outside grew sharper. The Catholic teachings of her upbringing cast homosexuality as sin. The small-town whispers left little room for difference. So Ellen buried her feelings, learned to deflect questions, and built an outer shell of charm. Her brother Vance, older and protective, pursued a career in entertainment as well, eventually becoming a musician and later a television producer. In many ways, Ellen looked up to him. Yet, even with her brother, Ellen held her secret close. To confess would have been to risk rejection at a time when she already felt fractured by her parents' divorce. And so Ellen did what she would become famous for. She performed. At family gatherings, at school, at church events, she made people laugh. She discovered that when others laughed, they stopped looking too closely. Humor became camouflage, the perfect disguise for a young girl who could not yet admit the truth, even to herself. Still, beneath the laughter was a current of fear. What if people knew? What if her secret destroyed the fragile bonds of love she was trying so hard to hold on to? As she approached adulthood, Ellen's identity was a quiet storm building within her. She dreamed of escape, of leaving Louisiana, of finding a place where she could breathe freely. But the South had already left its mark. The traditions, the struggles, the silence, they would follow her for decades, shaping the way she navigated fame and authenticity. In those formative years, Ellen learned two truths that would define her life. First, laughter could save you. Second, hiding could break you. The rest of her story would be the struggle between those two lessons. By the late 1970s, Ellen DeGeneres was no longer the quiet teenager from Louisiana, but a young woman searching for her place in the world. After briefly attending the University of New Orleans to study communications, she quickly realized that classrooms and textbooks could not contain her restless spirit. Within one semester, she left college behind, stepping into a world far less predictable, but infinitely more alive. Her first jobs were anything but glamorous. She worked as a paralegal, as a vacuum cleaner saleswoman, even as a waitress at TGI Fridays. Ellen moved through these roles with a mixture of frustration and humor, collecting observations about people and life that she would later turn into comedy. Every awkward customer, every strange boss, every humiliating task became raw material for her future craft. It was during this time that Ellen began performing small sets of stand-up comedy at local coffee houses and bars in New Orleans. Her style was not loud or vulgar like many comedians of the era. Instead, she mastered subtlety. Her humor was observational, gentle yet sharp, built on the details of everyday life. She joked about the absurdity of human behavior, about conversations with God, about the strange quirks of love and loneliness. One of her earliest routines, Phone Call to God, captured audiences instantly. The premise was simple. Ellen imagined picking up the phone to call God, questioning him about the chaos of the world, and receiving only cryptic or comical responses. The bit was both irreverent and deeply human, reflecting Ellen's unique ability to balance humor with vulnerability. People laughed, but they also felt a kind of kinship with her. Her comedic voice was different. She did not need to shock the audience with profanity or outrageous stories. Instead, she made them laugh by holding up a mirror to life's ordinary absurdities. In the crowded, smoky bars of New Orleans, Ellen's style stood out like a breath of fresh air. Slowly, she built a reputation. Local clubs invited her back. Audiences began to remember her name. Her stage presence grew more confident, though behind the scenes, she was still battling her secret identity, careful never to reveal too much of her personal life. On stage, she was safe, funny, relatable, accessible. Off stage, she remained guarded. The turning point came when Ellen entered a national competition for young comedians. Her wit and delivery caught the eye of producers, and soon she was booked on shows far beyond Louisiana. In 1982, she achieved what every comedian of her generation dreamed of, a spot on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. For a stand-up comic, Carson's couch was the golden gate to legitimacy. Only the most promising talents received the invitation. That night, Ellen walked onto the stage with her short haircut, her clean humor, and her wide, nervous smile. She performed with precision, every pause timed perfectly, every punchline landing with ease. When Johnny Carson laughed, it felt like the world was laughing. And when he called her over to sit beside him, a gesture reserved for only a few, it was a coronation. Ellen DeGeneres had arrived. The success catapulted her into the national spotlight. Appearances on Late Night with David Letterman, The Tonight Show again, and other television specials followed. Critics praised her for her intelligence, her timing, and her fresh approach in a male-dominated comedy scene. In an era when women comedians often struggled to be taken seriously, Ellen's presence was undeniable. Yet even in these early triumphs, Ellen carried a quiet burden. She was entering an industry built on image. To succeed meant to conform. While she was celebrated as a rising star, she knew there were limits to what Hollywood would accept. Her sexuality remained a private truth, hidden from the very audience that adored her. Still, Ellen pushed forward. Each stage, each performance was a test of resilience. She crafted her comedy as both armor and invitation, making people laugh so they would never think to look deeper, so they would never ask the questions she feared. By the end of the 1980s, Ellen was not just a stand-up comedian, but a national name. She toured across the United States, headlined comedy festivals, and began to audition for television roles. Hollywood was watching. Networks saw in her not just a comedian, but a potential star, someone who could carry a show, someone who could be America's next beloved face. For Ellen, the journey from coffee houses to Carson's couch was proof of what humor could achieve. She had turned the pain of her past, the fractures of her family, and the fear she carried into laughter that connected strangers. Comedy had become her passport out of Louisiana, her ticket into the world she had dreamed of. But success in Hollywood is never simple. The spotlight that had lifted Ellen up would soon demand more of her than she ever imagined. Fame would bring her closer to her dreams, but also closer to the truth she could no longer keep hidden. By the early 1990s, Ellen DeGeneres was no longer just a comedian working the late-night circuit. Hollywood had taken notice. Casting directors and producers, impressed by her sharp timing and relatable humor, began envisioning her not only as a guest star, but as a leading lady. In 1994, Ellen landed the opportunity that would cement her place in American pop culture. Her own sitcom, simply titled Ellen. It was a bold move for a network to put a relatively new comedian at the center of a primetime show. But ABC believed Ellen's quirky, offbeat charm could translate into the kind of character audiences would embrace week after week. The show revolved around Ellen Morgan, a bookstore owner navigating the everyday misadventures of life, love, and friendship. The character mirrored Ellen DeGeneres' own comedic persona, slightly awkward, endlessly witty, and filled with a kind of wholesome relatability. She was not the glamorous lead actress in the style of Hollywood's traditional sitcom heroines. She was something different, and every woman whose charm came from her imperfections. Audiences loved it. By its second season, Ellen had found its rhythm and its fans. Ellen's face appeared on magazine covers. She was praised as the new voice of American comedy, funny, approachable, and safe. She became, in many ways, America's sweetheart, the kind of performer parents trusted, children adored, and advertisers flocked to. Behind the scenes, though, Ellen felt the growing weight of contradiction. The sitcom character was supposed to be relatable to millions of American families, yet Ellen herself was hiding a fundamental truth. She was living a double life, the public Ellen, beloved by fans and sponsors, and the private Ellen, carrying a secret that could shatter her career if revealed. Writers and producers sensed something too. They shaped Ellen Morgan as perpetually unlucky in love, always fumbling through failed relationships with men. The joke worked on television, but for Ellen it was another mask to wear. Each time her character went on a date with a male love interest, Ellen felt the distance between her real self and the version projected to the world grow wider. Still, the success was undeniable. Awards followed, including a Golden Globe nomination. Ellen was a regular guest on Oprah, Letterman, and The Tonight Show. She was invited to host the Emmy Awards. She had become part of the cultural fabric of the decade. But in quiet moments, Ellen wrestled with a gnawing question. How long could she keep playing this role, on screen and off? The mid-1990s were a time when Hollywood's tolerance of LGBTQ characters was limited, and openly gay actors were almost non-existent in leading roles. Rumors could destroy careers. Tabloids speculated, sometimes with sharp cruelty, about Ellen's personal life. To the outside world, she brushed it off with a laugh. But in private, the fear was real. Her friends and close confidants noticed the pressure mounting. Some urged caution, don't risk everything now. Others encouraged her, the world needs you to be honest. For Ellen, it was a tug of war between survival and authenticity. On set, she often pushed the writers to give her character more depth, more realism, more of herself. The idea began to surface. What if Ellen Morgan, the sitcom character, came out too? What if television's most relatable woman revealed the truth Ellen had been hiding all along? The network resisted. Advertisers warned of backlash, but Ellen's conviction grew. She could not keep living in halves. She could not keep performing love stories that felt like lies. She wanted to tell her truth, not just in her personal life, but through her art. And so the stage was set. What had begun as a lighthearted sitcom about an awkward bookstore owner would soon transform into something far more radical, a cultural earthquake that would challenge television, politics, and America itself. But in the years before that fateful moment, Ellen remained America's sweetheart. Smiling on magazine covers, bantering with talk show hosts, making audiences laugh week after week. To millions, she was a symbol of joy and innocence. To herself, she was a woman standing on the edge of a cliff, preparing to leap into the unknown. By 1996, the tension inside Ellen DeGeneres had become unbearable. Her sitcom was thriving, her face was familiar across America, yet she carried a secret that ate away at her sense of integrity. Every laugh track, every scripted romance with a male character felt more and more like a betrayal, not only of herself, but of the millions watching who had never seen their truth reflected on primetime television. The decision did not come lightly. In a world where actors could lose everything for being openly gay, Ellen was about to stake her entire career on honesty. She did not simply want to come out in her personal life. She wanted her television character, Ellen Morgan, to come out too. It was a radical idea to fuse fiction and reality in a way that would forever change both. The negotiations with ABC and the network executives were tense. Advertisers grew nervous. Conservative groups issued warnings. But Ellen persisted. She knew that telling the truth could end her sitcom, but she also knew it could be her only chance at freedom. The result was what came to be known as the Puppy episode. Broadcast on April 30th, 1997, it drew nearly 42 million viewers, a staggering number that signaled not just entertainment, but a cultural reckoning. In the episode, Ellen Morgan visits a therapist played by none other than Oprah Winfrey. As Ellen stumbles through her words, her voice shakes, her eyes widen, and finally she blurts it out, "I'm gay." The line hung in the air like thunder. It was both scripted dialogue and real confession, both a fictional moment and a raw truth delivered to the world. The studio audience erupted in cheers. Millions at home felt a seismic shift ripple through their living rooms. For LGBTQ viewers, it was a moment of breathtaking validation. Finally, someone like them existed on television, not as a joke or a villain, but as the hero of the story. But outside those living rooms, the response was swift and brutal. The episode was celebrated by progressives and condemned by conservatives. Religious organizations launched boycotts. Sponsors pulled their advertisements. Some stations even refused to air the show. The sitcom, once a safe family favorite, had suddenly become a lightning rod for America's culture wars. For Ellen, the aftermath was devastating. Though the episode was historic, the media frenzy turned vicious. Tabloids labeled her as too gay, too political, too radical. Reporters hounded her, often reducing her identity to a single headline. Instead of being praised as an artist, she became defined by a single moment, a single declaration. The following season, the network struggled to navigate the backlash. Ratings declined. Writers attempted to balance Ellen's new identity with sitcom humor, but the pressure from advertisers and executives was relentless. Within a year, Ellen was canceled. What had been a triumphant act of honesty became, on the surface, a career-ending decision. Behind closed doors, Ellen was shaken. She had done what she believed was right, what she had to do. But the cost was greater than she imagined. Once celebrated as America's sweetheart, she was now treated as Hollywood's cautionary tale. Yet in the quiet aftermath, Ellen's decision reverberated beyond her own career. The puppy episode became a landmark in television history, opening doors for LGBTQ representation in ways that had seemed impossible before. Young people saw themselves reflected in Ellen's bravery. Parents were forced to confront their prejudices. Activists hailed the episode as a breakthrough in visibility. For Ellen personally, however, it was a paradox. She had given hope to millions, but in doing so, she had sacrificed her place in Hollywood. The years that followed would be her darkest, years of silence, depression, and exile. Still, the cultural earthquake could not be undone. The ground had shifted. And though Ellen would pay a heavy price, she had planted a seed that would grow in ways even she could not yet imagine. Looking back, Ellen herself would describe the moment as both the most terrifying and the most liberating of her life. It was like jumping off a cliff, she said. I didn't know if I would land, but I knew I couldn't stay where I was. And so the world remembers that night in 1997, when a sitcom turned into a revolution, when a comedian turned into a cultural icon, and when 3 words, "I'm gay," shook America to its core. When the laughter stopped, silence followed. After the puppy episode aired and the network pulled the plug on her sitcom, Ellen DeGeneres found herself standing at the edge of an abyss. Overnight, she went from one of television's brightest stars to someone Hollywood seemed eager to forget. The doors that had once opened so easily now slammed shut. Studios that had once courted her stopped returning her calls. Casting directors whispered that she was too risky. The industry, which had applauded her timing and wit, now treated her as if her very presence was radioactive. The irony was cruel. Ellen had not committed a crime, nor had she lost her talent. Her only offense was honesty. Yet in late 1990s America, honesty about being gay was treated as a scandal. For nearly 3 years, Ellen lived in the shadows. Her name vanished from television listings. She had no scripts to read, no auditions to attend. She walked the streets of Los Angeles like a ghost of her former self, watching other comedians and actors rise while her own career lay in ruins. The silence extended beyond her professional life. Friends grew distant, unsure how to comfort her or fearful of being associated with someone branded controversial. Even within the LGBTQ community, some activists criticized her for pushing too far, too fast. The rejection cut deeply. Ellen, who had once used humor to fill every room, now retreated into isolation. Depression settled in. She spoke openly years later about how lost she felt during that time. She had given the world her truth and been punished for it. Every newspaper headline, every mocking late-night joke, every canceled opportunity was a reminder of the cost she had paid. Money, too, became a problem. With no steady work and few endorsements, Ellen worried about how to sustain herself. The woman who had once headlined network television was now struggling simply to find purpose. But perhaps the hardest blow came from within herself. Ellen had built her life on making others laugh, on being the light in dark rooms. Now she could not even make herself smile. The absence of an audience felt like the absence of oxygen. For the first time, she questioned not just her career, but her worth. Yet in the quiet, Ellen also began to reflect. Exile stripped away the illusions. There were no more networks to please, no more advertisers to appease. She was left only with herself, her truth, her doubts, her pain. And in that stillness, she realized something important. Though Hollywood had abandoned her, she had not abandoned herself. During these years, Ellen turned inward. She practiced meditation, explored spirituality, and sought comfort in therapy. She leaned on the few friends who remained loyal as who reminded her that one act of courage could not erase decades of talent. Slowly, painfully, she began to heal. But it was not an easy road. Headlines continued to mock her. Jokes about her career became punchlines on other comedians' stages. Each time she turned on the television, she saw the space where she used to be. She felt invisible in an industry that thrived on visibility. Still, Ellen refused to disappear completely. She returned to stand-up comedy, performing in smaller venues, away from the harsh glare of television cameras. The stages were modest, but the laughter was real. Each gig was a reminder that her gift had not vanished, that somewhere beneath the rubble of scandal, her voice still mattered. Looking back, Ellen has described those years as a test of resilience. She had lost nearly everything: her show, her status, her confidence, but she had not lost her truth. And slowly, the world was changing. Conversations about LGBTQ rights were emerging. Activists were gaining ground. The culture that had rejected her was beginning, ever so slightly, to shift. It would take time, years in fact. But Ellen DeGeneres, once exiled, would rise again. She would return not as a sitcom star, but as something larger, a cultural force, a talk show host, and an icon of visibility. For now, though, in the late 1990s, Ellen was still in the wilderness, a woman who had dared to speak honestly and paid the price, a comedian without a stage, a voice silenced by the very industry she had once made laugh. And yet, even in exile, seeds were being planted. Seeds of resilience, seeds of transformation, seeds that would bloom into one of the most extraordinary comebacks in television history. The late 1990s were Ellen DeGeneres' wilderness years, but as the new millennium approached, a shift was coming, both in culture and within Ellen herself. The silence that had defined her exile was beginning to break. Slowly, cautiously, she returned to the place she had always belonged: the stage. Stand-up comedy became her refuge again. No longer headlining primetime television, Ellen found herself back in the intimate spaces of clubs and small theaters. The audiences were smaller, the lights dimmer, but the laughter was still there. Each performance reminded her of why she had started: to find connection, to turn pain into humor, to make people feel less alone. Then, in 2000, HBO aired The Beginning, a stand-up special that showcased Ellen's resilience. The title was intentional. It was not an ending, but a rebirth. Critics praised her timing, her wit, her ability to weave personal reflection into universal comedy. She joked about the absurdities of everyday life, but beneath the punchlines was a quiet defiance. She was still here. It was a turning point. Slowly, Hollywood began to remember her. Guest appearances followed, on sitcoms, talk shows, even in films. Each step back into the spotlight was cautious, but with each one, Ellen proved she was not a relic of the past, but a voice still worth hearing. The true breakthrough came in 2003, when NBC took a chance on a new daytime talk show, The Ellen DeGeneres Show. At first, there was skepticism. Could a woman once cast out of Hollywood really anchor a daily program? Could she win back an audience that had once turned away? The answer came quickly: yes. From its very first season, Ellen was a hit. Her blend of humor, kindness, and unfiltered joy resonated with viewers. She danced onto the stage each afternoon, turning what could have been a simple talk show into a celebration. Her interviews were warm and playful, her monologues sharp but never cruel. She gave away trips, cars, and laughter in equal measure. Audiences responded not just to her comedy, but to her authenticity. The very truth that had once cost Ellen her career now became her greatest strength. Viewers trusted her, believed in her, saw her as a friend. In living rooms across America, Ellen became a daily companion, someone who reminded people that joy was possible, even in difficult times. Her comeback was not just professional, it was cultural. In an era when LGBTQ representation was slowly growing, Ellen stood as proof that being openly gay was not a career killer, but a source of connection. She no longer had to hide, and the world, at least in part, was ready to embrace her for who she was. By the end of the show's first decade, Ellen had won dozens of daytime Emmy Awards, hosted the Oscars, and become one of the most recognizable faces in the world. The woman once silenced had returned louder than ever, not with anger, but with laughter, kindness, and generosity. The second act of Ellen DeGeneres was a triumph. Yet, behind the glittering stage lights, another story was unfolding, one of love, partnership, and personal fulfillment. Because Ellen's comeback was not only about her career, it was also about finding a place to belong in her own heart. As Ellen rebuilt her career in the early 2000s, another transformation was taking place. This one, far more intimate. For years, Ellen had carried her truth in isolation, navigating the loneliness that came with being one of the most visible gay women in entertainment. But in 2004, her life shifted when she met an actress whose presence would anchor her in ways fame never could: Portia de Rossi. Portia, best known for her role in the cult sitcom Arrested Development, was herself navigating the difficulties of being a closeted actress in Hollywood. Like Ellen once had, Portia struggled with fear of exposure, fear of rejection, fear of losing everything if her truth came to light. Their connection was immediate, rooted not only in attraction, but in shared vulnerability. At first, their relationship was private, shielded from a world still hungry for headlines. But soon, the bond between them grew too strong to hide. In 2005, they appeared together publicly, confirming what tabloids had speculated. For Ellen, this was not just another personal choice. It was a public declaration that she was no longer afraid. Their love became one of Hollywood's most visible same-sex relationships, arriving at a moment when marriage equality was at the center of America's culture wars. While politicians debated laws and courts issued rulings, Ellen and Portia embodied the quiet truth of what it all meant. Two people in love seeking dignity and recognition. When California briefly legalized same-sex marriage in 2008, Ellen and Portia seized the moment. On August 16, 2008, they were married in a small, intimate ceremony at their Beverly Hills home. Surrounded by close friends and family, they exchanged vows in a backyard filled with flowers. The images of Ellen in her white suit and Portia in her gown quickly circulated across the world. For millions, the photos symbolized not just a wedding, but a milestone in the struggle for LGBTQ rights. Their marriage was both deeply personal and profoundly political. At a time when opponents of equality painted same-sex unions as abstract threats, Ellen and Portia presented a different picture, a couple grounded in love, humor, and mutual respect. Their relationship became a counter-narrative to prejudice, showing the world that same-sex love was as ordinary and as extraordinary as any other. On her talk show, Ellen often spoke warmly about Portia, sharing anecdotes that revealed both her affection and her playful humor. Audiences embraced their relationship, finding in it a reminder that authenticity and love could flourish even under the brightest spotlight. For Portia, the relationship was life-changing as well. She credited Ellen with giving her the courage to live openly and proudly. Years later, Portia would write in her memoir about the struggles she had faced with identity and acceptance, and how Ellen's unwavering support helped her heal. Together, they became more than a couple. They became symbols. They appeared on magazine covers, attended galas, and stood as visible proof of the progress being made. And yet, beyond the cameras, they lived a life filled with the simple joys of companionship, shared laughter, shared homes, shared dreams. In many ways, Ellen's marriage to Portia completed her comeback. Professionally, she had reclaimed her place in Hollywood. Personally, she had found the love and stability that had eluded her for so long. The girl from Louisiana who once hid her truth in silence was now a woman living openly, proudly, and joyfully with a partner by her side. Their love story continues to resonate, not because it is perfect, but because it is real. It stands as a reminder that behind every political battle, every cultural debate, are human lives shaped by love. And for Ellen, after years of exile and loneliness, love was not just a refuge. It was a victory. By the 2010s, Ellen DeGeneres had become more than a comedian, more than a talk show host. She was a cultural institution. The Ellen DeGeneres Show dominated daytime television, winning dozens of daytime Emmy Awards and reaching millions of viewers across the globe. Celebrities clamored to sit in her guest chair. Presidents and first ladies appeared on her stage. She danced with the audience, gave away scholarships and houses, and became, for many, a daily dose of optimism and entertainment. For the LGBTQ community, Ellen's visibility was transformative. She had taken the risk of living authentically in the 1990s, suffered the consequences, and emerged as a triumphant figure. Young people struggling with identity looked to her as proof that survival and even joy was possible. Parents of LGBTQ children saw her as a bridge, someone who could help them understand and accept. Ellen's cultural impact came out. No one like her existed on television. By the 2010s, networks featured openly gay characters in dramas and sitcoms, talk shows, and news programs. While she was not solely responsible for this shift, Ellen was undeniably a catalyst. She had cracked open a door that others would walk through. Her legacy also extended to philanthropy. Ellen used her platform from animal rights to disaster relief. She donated millions through her show's giveaways and foundations. She encouraged kindness as a guiding principle, often closing her broadcasts with the words, "Be kind to one another." For a generation of viewers, that phrase became synonymous with her brand. And yet, legacies are rarely without complexity. In the late 2010s, Ellen faced controversies that series of The Ellen DeGeneres Show came forward with allegations of a toxic workplace, describing environments of fear, intimidation, and harassment. The public, once charmed by her message of kindness, now questioned whether the brand matched the reality behind the scenes. The backlash was swift. Headlines turned critical. Social media, once her ally, amplified the stories of disillusioned staff. Ellen, woe of joy, was suddenly scrutinized as a symbol of hypocrisy. In 2020, she addressed the allegations on air, acknowledging the problems and pledging change. But the damage to her reputation was undeniable. This duality, hero and flawed figure, pioneer and imperfect human, became part of Ellen's narrative. Her legacy could not be told only through the lens of triumph. It also, the controversies tarnished her image permanently. For others, they simply underscored the complexity of a woman who had lived her life in extremes, adored, rejected, celebrated, and criticized. Cannot be erased. She made millions laugh. She changed the landscape of television. She offered visibility to those who had lived unseen. She endured exile and returned stronger. And though her career faced RC of her story remains one of resilience and impact. As scholars, journalists, and fans reflect on her career, Ellen DeGeneres stands as both a cautionary tale and a beacon, a reminder that no icon is without flaws, but also that one act of courage, 3 simple words, "I'm gay," can alter culture forever. Her legacy, then, troversese. It is the conversation she forced America to have. It is the millions of lives touched by her honesty. It is the paradox of a woman who built her career on making others happy while struggling, often privately, with her own pain. And like all Lewins, will be debated long after the cameras have stopped rolling. Ellen DeGeneres' story is not one of simple triumph or tragedy. It is a story of cost and of freedom, the cost of truth, the freedom of authenticity. Few in Hollywood have lived such extremes. Adored as America's sweetheart, vilified as a cultural rebel, resurrected as an icon, and questioned again as a flawed human being, he feels almost cinematic. A young girl from Louisiana using humor to survive her parents' divorce. A struggling comedian turning small stages into places of revelation. A sitcom star laughing while carrying a secret. A cultural earthquake, speaking the words that changed television forever. A pariah, silenced and exiled. A comeback queen dancing across daytime television, a wife finding love in Portia de Rossi, and finally a legacy, both radiant and complicated. What remains most striking is authenticity. In 1997, she could have stayed quiet, continued playing the role Hollywood wanted her to play, and preserved her career. Instead, she chose to leap. The fall was brutal, but the landing, years later, was extraordinary. Her story asks us uncomfortable questions. How much are we willing to live openly in a world that rewards illusion? And how do we hold our icons? Are they flawless symbols or human beings carrying both light and shadow? Ellen herself once said, "Follow your passion. Stay true to yourself. Never follow someone else's path you lost and you see a path. Then by all means, you should follow that." It is both a joke and a philosophy, to carve your own way, even if it costs you everything. As her talk show ended in 2022, Ellen stood on stage one final time. She thanked her audience. She reminded them of how far the world had supply for being honest. And she closed with the same words she had spoken for nearly 2 decades: be kind to one another. Perhaps that is the essence of her legacy. Not perfection, not endless laughter, but the courage to be visible, to stand in the open, to say aloud what once had to be whisper her career. The freedom of truth transformed her into a symbol. And between those two realities lies the life of Ellen DeGeneres, Complex, contradictory, unforgettable. Her story question: what will we do with the freedom she fought for? Will we carry it forward so that future generations no longer have to choose between authenticity and acceptance? Ellen's journey reminds us ear of being themselves. That laughter, when rooted in honesty, can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the bravest act is simply to stand in the light and say without apology, "This is who I am."